Hey everybody, it's Garm here. Coming back to you on a Thursday morning. Quite an early Thursday morning. Wanted to come on and talk about a group that I've been meaning to for the longest time. A little more in depth. Tangerine Dream, all-time favorite group. Partly inspired by, there had been a thread going around recently showing your stones. People were showing their Rolling Stones albums, collections. I guess this could be called showing your dreams in a sense. And yeah, I wanted to come on and I know I touched on certain areas of their discography over the years, but never showed it as a whole. And no way I'm going to be able to show everything in one pass. So kind of divided up into segments. But yeah, I got the LPs here, and my introduction to them, first became aware of them, was seeing them in Encyclopedia of Rock, a book called Encyclopedia of Rock. It must have been late grade school or maybe middle school. They would have profiles of various bands and artists up until that point. I think it was from 1978 the book came out, and they had one on Tangerine Dream where they would list of course the group, the members of the group, the current members, the instrumentation, little synopsis, and then the discography. And was intrigued because the three members at the time, Edgar Froese, Peter Baum, and Chris Franca. It was just before Peter left, and all it said was synthesizers after each name. And that really intrigued me, seeing that as well as their story. And I think they featured a picture of Ricochet, a 1975 album. So I always kept it in mind that this is something I'll have to look for one day, or just keep open about. But yeah, that's where it started, and eventually bought their first album, or bought my first album by them in summer of '91. And it's been going on ever since. So I would just start right in with where it began with them, as far as proper albums. Electronic Meditation, 1969. Definitely not quite an indicator, at least style-wise, of what was to come. Highly experimental. Some would say it was kind of a psych or acid rock. They touch on that, but I'd say it's more avant-garde, more purely experimental. I think it was recorded in a factory or warehouse, some kind of setting. It very much evokes that. You could imagine steam, machines, and a lot of grinding, and a lot of just very, very industrial sounding. You could say it was industrial before industrial. And there are various instruments here. Of course, you have Edgar, founding member, Klaus Schulze, Konrad Schnitzler, some of the great, you say, luminaries of German electronic and experimental music of the time. Like all the names here, and then you have Jimmy Jackson among the others here. But yeah, very very powerful stuff. It's on the Varese Vintage reissue here, and the early ones came out on the Or label, or Ear label. But yeah, very much not quite an indicator of what was to come. If you are coming from a place of again psych or acid rock, this could be a place to start, but keeping in mind that it's much more experimental, and it goes into a lot of other areas, a little more difficult and challenging, but yeah, worth taking a plunge. Maybe not for the very first listen if you're curious about them in general and you're into other things, but yeah, it's where it started with them. And next up, Alpha Centauri, 1971. Edgar still being in the group the whole time, until his passing. But now we've added Chris Franca, who of course was in the group figured into the group for many years after that, and Steve Schroeder. They're playing a variety of different instruments here. Now this, when I ordered this, didn't realize it was a twofer. but only paid for a good price, so later Atem. But yeah, here they're going from the factory, I guess you could say, the industrial factory, out into space, exploring other galaxies and dimensions. More electronic, adding synthesizers and percussion. It does have kind of an interplanetary. You do hear a little bit of the psychedelic aspects of the previous album, but they've left a lot of it behind as well. And yeah, just gone into something that's a lot more expansive, still dark and kind of churning, and yeah, you could hear a little Eastern influences, but yeah, you could hear a little bit of inklings of what you were to become more known for overall. So yeah, Alpha Centauri. And next up, we're going to 1972, Zeit. Probably my all-time favorite of theirs overall, even with everything else I've been into over the years. Oh, I think I mentioned the. Sorry about that. Try to remember. Showing the labels here. Yeah, it's a version reissue on the Alpha Centauri. Yeah, here definitely going into much deeper territory. You could say abstract, leaving behind conventional harmony, melody, harmony, rhythm. Even though there was hints of that on the previous albums, this is almost completely devoid of it. And as far as the artwork was done, Edgar had done the painting, and his wife Monique had done photography. If you could see right here, this little figure, that's Jerome, Edgar's son, who was to come to figure well, throughout most of the rest of the band's history. Edgar had referred to him as being kind of a mascot for the group, appearing on the album covers, but then became an actual member late 80s until about the mid 2000s. But here on Zeit, it gets about as deep and dark as it gets. If you're coming from a place of, if you want to say like dark ambient or music that's superficially static, but kind of a perfect, for me it's like a perfect melding of the organic and ethereal and let's say spacebound. This is really a good one to get into. This is also a later Virgin reissue from '76. This is a very early one that I picked up by them around summer of '92. But yeah, it still remains a favorite. And now we've added Peter Baumann to the group, as well as Edgar and Chris Franca, which of course became known as their kind of the core lineup and among the most creative. And next up, following year, we have Atem. Rather larger rendering here of a picture of Jerome. Again, very striking artwork. And this one somewhat takes where Zeit left off, or at least in parts. But there's percussion, as well as synthesizer. You have now the mellotron, which Edgar became particularly fascinated with and utilized quite a bit on his own solo work. Here, at times, you feel like you're in space. Now we visited another planet, and we're in sounds like a jungle, a rainforest. You can hear some crickets here. So you can hear birds and crickets, and amongst the synthesizers. Again, kind of that melding of organic, kind of squishy, earthbound, into the soil, but as well as being in space. Again, very expansive, incredible atmosphere here. This definitely evokes this time of year. I find hot, humid, oppressive, but also much darker side of all that. But, yeah, excellent one here, Atem. And these were all on the same, initially on the same label, or ear. Yeah, Atem. And next up, the same lineup and moving to a new label called Virgin. You have Phaedra, album that really kind of, you could say, put them on the map in a larger way, much wider way. Becoming almost exclusively synthesizer now. You've left the percussion behind. Occasionally there's some, there would be some guitar used here and there, but it's mainly just the synthesizers and mellotron, organ. I just love the artwork, and like the artwork. There's Jerome again. I like the artwork. It does have kind of a more of a bleak, desolate, really kind of winter landscape. Very much evokes being out, caught in the tundra somewhere, lost and maybe a little confused, but also excited about where you could find yourself eventually. Also introducing the sequencer. It's kind of throbbing ostinato bass line from the synthesizer, which they were experimenting with, and Christopher Franke in particular. From what I understand, there were a lot of mistakes made, or there were a lot of problems, technical problems with making the album, which they left a lot of that stuff in and kind of made what you have here. So very, very raw, but yeah, just a very, very powerful statement. And imagine what it would have been like hearing it at that time, in late '73, early '74. Very influential on electronic artists from here on out. Yeah, Phaedra. And next up, another personal favorite of mine, Rubicon, 1975. Kind of taking, in a sense, where Phaedra left off, refining it, expanding it. Just incredible. I'd mentioned a lot of these albums too had mostly consisted of 2 or 3, maybe 4 very long pieces. You have 2 side long cuts here. Various instrumentation from each member. Again, you have the sequencer here, really it's kind of a sense of propulsion, You're traveling through space again, visiting another planet. And here it's much more, really like the cover, it's like more of an aquatic feel. But what would it be like, an ocean on another realm, another dimension. Yeah, incredible, traveling music here. Again, kind of having that somewhat of a winterscape too, or that desolate sense of desolation of Phaedra, but it seems to go deeper and more expansive. Very, very powerful stuff here. A good introduction to them if you want to really jump into the thick of what they're doing, experimentally, but also getting a sense of what's most representative of them. So, yeah, Rubicon in '75. Next up we have Ricochet in '75. Yeah, this was the picture that I'd seen in the book. This cover that, made me think, I gotta keep this group in mind. Their first live album, although they was later overdubs and some percussion, and it was actually culled from many hours of tape during their tour in '75. You have Edgar here, Chris Frank, and Peter Baumann. You could hear, kind of a continuation, not so much of the themes, but of the general feel, especially with the sequencer of Rubicon. Though this feels to me a little bit more earthbound, but yeah, incredible journey. You do get a sense of, they were so exploratory and so also improvisational at the time too. There's a lot of improvisation. The themes would kind of build up out of the improvisation, or there would be like bare hints of melody. You did hear a little bit more in the way of melody and even riffs coming into the music a little bit more with this album, it seemed. Even some acoustic piano. So, and some nice guitar from Edgar, who always had that real kind of pretty psychedelic. Someone had said his sound was kind of stuck in '67, but in a good way. It always just kind of brought it with him throughout the time. So it's nicely represented on here. So yeah, Ricochet, '75. Oh, forgot that. Showing the label. Yeah, the green and the red there. Stratosphere, 1976. Now this signals quite a bit of a change style-wise, introducing a lot more melody, themes, you know, say more recognizable, memorable themes. Again, with the same lineup, and the core sound with the sequencer, and always being primarily electronic. But on here, it's definitely more melodic, you know, a little more tuneful. Still taking you in space. You know, there's always kind of a spacey group in a lot of ways, at least from the early years. But seems like you're traveling through. It almost feels like landscapes from up above. You know, you're seeing everything from, you know, seeing everything below you. Kind of an aerial view of the shifting landscapes is what it feels like. In various times of day, and yeah, excellent stuff here. Some nice guitar, and there's a little bit of harmonica at times, which is just throwing in these little touches here and there, these little, you know, nuggets of something different. But yeah, probably their most accessible album up to this point, and this would be a good introduction if you want to get into the early stuff and you're coming from maybe a little bit more of a, if you're more into popular music, and it's a good entryway. You know, not too difficult. So yeah, Stratosphere from '76. Changing label here. Next up, another live album, Encore, 1977. Again with the same lineup. I did mention, well, I probably already showed that Zeit was their first double album. This is their second. Always love these collage kind of pictures on albums. On here you could kind of hear continuation and some themes, hints of themes of from Stratosphere. And of course expanding on them and going in different directions. Edgar plays a pretty good deal of guitar on here. Again with that sound, that very, you know, very distinctive kind of dirty sound. Not particularly refined, but very quite beautiful and striking for what he's doing. My personal favorite piece on here is Desert Dream on the fourth side. Kind of harking back a little bit to Zeit as far as that kind of superficially static, you know, kind of barely shifting quality, but very dark, mysterioso. You do imagine a kind of desolate landscape. Of course, this time the desert, you know, just seeing almost nothing, and then seeing little bits of maybe little mirages here and there. But that's a great piece. I think it's worth the album for that. See them there in their element on stage. But yeah, good live representation of the time. And, next up we have Sorcerer. I think this was their first soundtrack on record. Of course, they did many over the years. Became well known for that. Same lineup. Filmed by William Friedkin, which I know I'd seen quite some years ago. I don't quite remember it, and it was really striking for where they didn't use the music in the film. There's a lot of silence, but and of course here you have, you know, shorter pieces. You know, shorter than they'd ever been on probably any of their albums. So hearing them in those kind of bits and bites of what they're doing. Again, kind of with that the melody of Stratosphere, and you could really kind of hear, in some ways, a culmination of everything they'd done up to this point. Kind of throwing everything in at different periods, representing what they've done up to this point, and also doing justice to the film. What I understand, they didn't actually see the film upon doing the soundtrack. They received a script, read the script, and then they made the music to that, and then just sent the tapes to the director, and they cut it from there. You know, other groups and artists have done it that way. Upon hearing that as a kid, though, I thought that was really pretty neat. So, yeah, Sorcerer. Next up, quite a change in the group. Peter Baumann had left by this time, 1978, and then came in Steve Joliffe on vocals, a variety of woodwinds, some synthesizer, as well as Kraus Krieger on drums and percussion. A very different kind of album here, just 3 cuts. Again, on the same Virgin label. Yeah, going into definitely a different territory here, introducing vocals and lyrics for the first time, sung by Steve Joliffe in the first side. Yeah, a lot of people weren't nuts about it, the big fans, hardcore fans up to that point, including myself when I first heard the album. The second side is more in line with what they had been doing previously, but still with more colors from Steve Joliffe and the various woodwinds, and it took me a while to get used to the vocals. Wouldn't really know how to describe them. Not really punk, and it's definitely not a punk sounding album, but you could hear a little alluding to that, as well as the lyrics, which are very rather surreal and it's fascinating. It's we talk about favorite artists who you want to understand, you really want to get a sense of what they're doing overall, the arc of their story. And it's an album that I think one would have to persevere with a little bit. And it took me years, but there was a point where it struck me, and it's like I caught up to them with this. So it's still not one of my favorite overall, but it's an album that I've definitely come to appreciate more over time. So, yeah, Cyclone. Yeah, next up, pretty much the same lineup, although Steve Joliffe was just on that one album. Now we have Force Majeure. That was from '78. This is from '79. Again, kind of expanding outward a little more, introducing more melody, conventional rhythm, instrumentation to a certain degree. Maybe even hearing little hints of disco, especially on a couple minutes into the first cut. Title cut, Force Majeure, something with the hi-hat of Klaus Krieger, get a little bit of a sense of that, but still experimenting, still working with the sequencer, and still exploring the bounds of electronic music. But yeah, this is another one that would be good, again, if you're coming from a more conventional song, pop rock song oriented, just interest. This would be good to get into from that. So yeah, Force Majeure. Next up, another favorite here. Now lineup has changed once again. Klaus Krieger leaves, and now we have Johannes Schmeling, in addition to Edgar and Chris Franke. So Tangram from 1980. Absolutely gorgeous album. Now this might be the first album that they did where you could really hear a sense of, say, romanticism, not just in terms of like a style, like romantic keyboard playing, like classical, but really romantic as it's really music, from the heart. I mean, you could hear it, say, heart on the sleeve, with the melodies and developing kind of the way they had been, 2 side-long cuts. Very expansive, changing a lot of textures and moods. But yeah, it's much more melodic, much more, just accessible overall. Yeah, I'd have to say, I know a lot of people do kind of ranking albums. I'd be very hard pressed to do that, but I'd say this would be in the top 3. I was thinking of Shannon had done, I think, Genesis 70 to 80, ranking those albums. I don't know, it'd be quite a challenge to rank these, but I'd say for me, Zeit, Rubicon, Ricochet, going back and forth, and then this album would be at least the top 3, for this group. And, probably has been like that for a long time. Another one highly recommended if you want to hear, where it really got into the melody, and just absolutely gorgeous album here. Tangram, 1980. And next up, another soundtrack, and probably something I had heard Thief from 1981. Probably something I had heard as a kid and didn't realize it. So I know my folks were a big fan of, always been a big fan of the movie, and liked the group from that. Yeah, Elektra. Again, you have shorter pieces here. Getting a little bit more into the digital realm too. As the technology is changing, and they embraced it as it came along. Whatever came next, they were right up on it, and definitely used it in their own way. And yeah, great stuff here. Again, very it's quite accessible as well as experimental. Still with the sequencer very much at the forefront, but also guitar, and there might be a song in here. Lyrics I don't quite remember. So it recorded in 1980, Chris Frank's studio. There's a piece called Confrontation, composed by Craig Seffin, so that's the one different piece. But yeah, Thief, definitely among their more recommended soundtracks. Next up, another live album. Always love this cover. Quixote, I think it's pronounced. And all in German here. This one's taking themes from Tangram, and again expanding upon them. This actually, I find it seems to hark back as well to the earlier stuff. It's on the Amiga label here. Kind of harking back to what they were doing in the mid-70s with the sequencer, although with more of the melodic sense that they had brought up to this point. Excellent stuff here. I just played this last night after a while, and it's wonderful. Probably one that's not, it's probably overlooked a little bit as far as their catalog overall, whether it's studio or live. There's an album called Pergamon, which I think is a kind of a reissued version of this, and I think it might have been remastered because it sounds different. It sounds like a different mix. I prefer the mix on this one personally, not having heard the other one in a while, but definitely recommended. Again, one that just isn't, I think it's talked about or quite as well known. But, very worth hearing. Yeah. Quixote, I recorded in January 1980 in Berlin. And next up, Exit, 1981. The same lineup with Froza, Franca, and Schmeling. A cool cover here. I'd shown this once as being a favorite summertime album, even though the music seems to evoke kind of dark, desolate winterscapes in a lot of ways. I always found it more summer-like. Again, more the hot, humid, oppressive feel to it. This goes further into the digital realm. Shorter pieces, a little bit more of a pop rock structure. I think even hearing the synclavier opening up the piece, which sort of sounds like you almost think you're about to hear "Beat It" by Michael Jackson. If you remember those opening chords, it's the same instrument and the same sound. But yeah, more accessible, but also just has that signature sound that they were expanding upon. But, yeah, it's another good place to start if you're not familiar. And the next year they had White Eagle, 1982. Definitely going full on into digital, really getting into software and really expanding more in that direction. This label here, version. Yeah, you have one sidelong piece, Mojave Plan, which goes into a lot of different changes, kind of episodic. Yeah, I think at this point, a lot of the hardcore fans, who prefer the analog, the warmth of that, might have found this a bit sterile. And I know in certain moods, I enjoy this more than others. For me, it's really worth it though for the title cut, White Eagle, which is just it's very short, but just kind of straight to the punch in a sense, very atmospheric. something I'd heard on Star Streams, actually, musical Star Streams, played quite a bit. That was a good, it's a good entryway. So yeah, White Eagle, getting a little further into that kind of new phase. And next up, Hyperborea, 1983. Again with the same lineup and still more into the further into the digital realm. I like both covers. I always kind of prefer the back one a little more. Maybe the simplicity of it, the atmosphere of it. So yeah, you have 3 shorter pieces, 1 longer piece. I recorded August of '83 in Berlin. Somewhat harkening back to the early stuff a little bit. You hear little Eastern touches, like Far Eastern touches of Indian music, just a little bit, sometimes almost bordering on maybe a pastiche, but done with just enough, I guess, judgment and balance where, with everything else they're doing. But yeah, another one that has a nice, they're incorporating the instruments a little more refined way, but also they're finding their place. A good mixture of the organic as well. It's not too, some of that stuff gets on a little sterile at the time, especially when it was developing the early digital synthesizers. But it seemed to find a good balance on here, getting a little further into their story. Yeah, Hyperborea from 1983. Next up, another soundtrack, Firestarter. Drew Barrymore there. Yeah, I remember seeing the film. First came on cable. Pretty harrowing at the time. You were only, I was 9 years old, maybe 8 or 9. Yeah, 1984. Of course, you know this film, and yeah, I mean the music is just really stands on its own. You could hear a little bit of what they were doing previously with Hyperborea, but again, obviously you'd have shorter, punchier pieces for the album. But yeah, evokes it wonderfully. Very distinctive themes, and yeah, makes me want to see the film again since it's been many years. I mean, it's been since the 80s, I think, since I've seen the movie. But yeah, great stuff here. Really nice soundtrack by them. Next up, we have another live album, a double live album, Poland. Same lineup with Schmeling. Yeah, the Warsaw concert. As far as their live albums, this might be just about my favorite up to this point. I didn't mention too. Up until a certain point, I don't have all the albums. I know they did an album called Logos, which I'll touch on later on, a future video. But this is among my favorite of their live albums early on. Another one that mixes really nicely what they were doing up to this point with Hyperborea. You could also hear a little bit of the early stuff, like Ricochet and with the sequencers. But yeah, very powerful, cinematic. So much of their stuff is, and yeah. Oh, and they had moved to a new label by now, Jive Electro. So further changes to ensue there. But, yeah, excellent stuff. Label. Jive Electro. Poland, 1984. There's another soundtrack here. Flashpoint. A film I haven't seen. With Chris Christopherson and Treat Williams starring in here. You can kind of hear a little bit of Hyperborea they're doing up to that point. There's another one from 1984. Rip Torn and Tess Harper are also in this. Pretty nice. Not quite as distinctive as the previous soundtracks, I find. But of course, I think Edgar had pointed out himself, when you're doing soundtracks, it really is a collaboration with the director and kind of meeting halfway, and you're kind of acquiescing. So you might not hear quite as much of quite as distinctive as what they were doing previously, but you still know it's them. Yeah, there's one piece the title cut Flashpoint, performed by the Gems. It has vocals and lyrics, though it goes really nicely, actually blends in nicely with the music. Might be more pop rock. So yeah, Flashpoint. The next up here, I had this, wasn't quite sure where to put this in the chronology. Copywritten 1986 on Relativity. Green Desert. Originally recorded in 1973, there was a period where Peter Baumann was on a bit of a hiatus from the group, traveling on his own, and Edgar and Chris Franca had put something together, just the two of them, and the tapes were shelved for quite some time, till I think 1984, and Edgar remixed and remastered them. So you get kind of a sound of the time, but also of what they were doing in the 80s, which could lead to a little confusion as to, it's like, where do you place it in their overall story. So yeah, it was recorded between Atem and Phaedra. You can kind of hear that, but it's also kind of a combination of what they were doing then, a brighter version. The first piece, title cut Green Desert, sounds very, very Pink Floydian, right from the beginning. The way they kind of slow lumbering rhythm, and a lot of guitar on there, Edgar's guitar. But yeah, if you're a fan of them, Pink Floyd, this would be a good entryway into Tangerine Dream overall. So yeah, Green Desert from 73 or 86, depending how you look at it. And next up here, jumping quite a little bit forward, their live album, Live Miles. My introduction to the group, bought this on cassette right around this time, August of 1991. As good as introduction as anything else. Another one though, where there were some later overdubs, and I think it wasn't all one continuous event entirely, just based on that. But yeah, just two long pieces. Again, kind of getting a sense of what they were doing early on, just very, very expansive, and the various changing themes. Probably a little bit, at this point, their sound wasn't quite as distinctive. They're bringing in more, the synthesizers of the time, pretty much all digital at this point, and but still, you can still tell it's them. Always like the shot here, shot on stage. Another group. But, yeah, it was a good introduction to them from from that time. I was 15 at the time, so yeah, it was good. Good place to start. Live Miles. Jumping ahead several years, going into another phase. I didn't mention with Live Miles, by then they'd added Paul Haslinger rather than Johannes Schmeling. I think he left in '85, so they had Paul Haslinger, a much younger musician they had for several years. But now we're jumping to 1992, the Raccoon, and by then Jerome Froza, pictured here, had joined as a fully fledged member, playing keyboards and guitar, like his dad. And this had gone into a much different sound than previously. It started changing around the late 80s. They joined Private Music, and yeah, didn't mention too that Chris Franca, that was his last album with the group, was Live Miles. So things changed considerably from there. And on here, it's much more of a really straight out, you could say, pop rock, in a sense, without vocals or lyrics. A little saxophone on occasion. Very much earthbound music. They're not really in space anymore. They're still traveling, but it's definitely more kind of everyday scenes and evocations. But and for some reason, I always say this is far from my favorite album, yet it's one I go to so many times. Something about it, I've never quite been able to delve into it. Why? But so maybe it is a favorite in a sense, just not being in the conventional way. This is Essential Records, though I think it was originally in the States. It came out on Miramar, which they were with for several years. So yeah, Raccoon from 1992. Now we're jumping ahead quite a bit, and Eventually I'll show CDs, and that'll be more, hopefully a little more comprehensive. But we're going ahead many years now. See, all the way to 2015. Wait, I might have these out of sequence. Let me, in one moment. No, it's right. So the change was quite different at this point, just within the last few years. Edgar was still in the group, of course, and Jerome had long been out of the group at this point. Gone through a lot of different lineup changes, but he did a series, Sonic Poem series, where he would take the writings of favorite authors and not set the music to lyrics. I think he had done that at times previously, but on here it's something that's more inspired by the writing, instrumental music inspired by the writing. Fantastic stuff here. Really, in a way, you could say it kind of harks back to what they were doing in the 80s, the best of what they were doing in the 80s, in my opinion, early on, but still very much modern, very much a very current sound here. There's the lineup at the time. Yeah, you had Torsten Queichning, Bernard Babel, Linda Spa, who had figured into their history for quite a while, since the very early 90s. Iris Kama and Hoshiko Yamane, who's still a current member of the group. But beautiful stuff here. If you like the early 80s stuff as well as something more modern and exploratory, I highly recommend this. I'd say this is one of their, my personal favorite of their of what they've done this century. Easily in the last 20, even 25 years. Excellent. The Island of the Fae from Edgar Allan Poe's, based on his writings. Excellent. And another one here in the series. We have The Castle, Franz Kafka. Kind of in a similar vein to the previous one, harking back as well as looking forward, and being quite current. It's on the Eastgate label. It's their own label, Edgar's label. Yeah, just beautiful stuff here. Something also Edgar had been doing at this point. A lot of the albums were under Tangerine Dream's name, but a lot of them were basically solo albums. In the studios, he would do pretty much play everything himself, and maybe have some people guesting, and then he would have the band come, when they were doing a tour. But yeah, just incredible stuff here. Yeah, all compositions by Edgar Froese, and a little bit by Torsten Queichning, who really took over for the group for the most part after Edgar's passing. But another one highly recommended as far as their later output. Yeah, and really anything I've heard in the the Sonic Poem series, very well worth hearing. Of course, now I'm curious to read more of Kafka. I've only read a little bit of him over the years. So yeah, just a couple more here. LPs. Quantum Gate, an album that was much awaited after Edgar's passing in it was January of 2015. It was much discussed work that they had done together, both Edgar and the remaining members, as well as their own, what they did afterwards. Just fantastic stuff here. I think I did a video on this album too when it came out. Yeah, Sensing Elements. To me, it's worth it for that song alone. Another double album here. A label. But yeah, just fantastic stuff here. Yeah, I like this. I like the group. What the remaining members of the group are doing, with the band. What they're doing lately, since this album, is more and harking back to the mid '70s, without sounding like what you can call like a review band, where they're just playing the old hits sort of thing. Of course, they didn't have much in the way of hits overall, but still expanding upon that original sound and aesthetic with the sequencer, and you can hear hints of that on here, as well as the melody, and just ever exploring and expanding. Yeah, you have Ulrich Schnaus, who come into the group, fine solo artist in his own right. Hoshiko Yamane, playing violin and electronics. Adds a wonderful dimension to the group, color, and as far as mood and everything. And Torsten Queichning, who I think joined the group in the mid-2000s. Yeah, excellent. Quantum Gate. Oh, and I have, this came out since then. The only 12-inch single I have of theirs. Leviathan and Run to Vegas. You have side A and then you have side double A. Yeah, Run to Vegas is, I believe, an earlier piece, the late 70s, I want to say. And then backed by Leviathan, which came out on an album from, I think, 2008 called Views from a Red Train, which is kind of a pop rock feel to it, but still very much kind of their signature sound that they'd been returning to. Yeah, really nice. Kind of nice hearing those little snippets of them on this format. One more thing here. The only 7-inch I have of theirs. Yeah, Warsaw in the Sun. It's another Jive Electro. I think this came out in, let's say 83, 84. Let's see, yeah, 84. Very much like they were doing at the time. I know they have other ones, other singles. Yeah, kind of like you see from the exit cover there. So, yeah, Tangerine Dream, Warsaw in the Sun, and yeah, those are the LPs I have. Yeah, I wasn't quite sure how to go about this, if I wanted to do it by decade and mix all the formats in, but I don't know, disorganized. I would just confuse myself if I haven't been already. But yeah, so yeah, those are the LPs, and yeah, I'll continue on sometime soon, maybe in the next few days. I'll show CDs, which I have many more of those than these. I don't know how many people will be interested in that. It could be quite long. I'm sure this has gone for quite a while. And maybe another video with miscellaneous things. But yeah, the journey continues with this group. Started 29 years ago, and still at the core, even with everything else I'm getting into. And yeah, just something of a little slice here. And yeah, hope you enjoyed, for whoever's still here watching. And thank you for watching. And yeah, be back on soon with some more. Hope we're all doing as well as possible. Until the next one. Peace, love, and joy.